Hello and welcome to episode 34 of Afrikanists Assemble. In this month's episode, we want to focus on African genres of poetry. A multitude of genres and representations can be found all over the continent and beyond. These are often a rich expression of cultures and identities, but also of changes and struggles cutting across time and space. This is why we asked our contributors the following question. What is your favorite genre or subgenre of African poetry? Where does it come from and what's so unique about it? Let's listen into the different answers they gave.
I love Igbo oral praise poems, especially the kind performed with Oja. Oja is a musical instrument which is called flute in English. However, Oja is not just an ordinary musical instrument, it is a voice that speaks. The person who plays Oja is called Ubu Oja. It is believed that the voice that is heard in Oja performance is the voice of the spirit and not just a mere human voice. The Ubu Oja is seen as an instrument through which the spirit voice speaks. Sometimes Ubu Oja performs without verbal expressions. The person whose praise is being rendered will intermittently interject to state that he understands the message in order to encourage the Ubu Oja. In some performances, the Ubu Oja intermittently stops to use verbal expressions to intone the praises of the subject. But in some performances, the praise singer does not use Oja, but patterns the praise poem after the reading of Oja. That is, the praise poem is often chanted. Some people claim to understand the language of Oja, as well as the information being conveyed. Oja speaks to everyone, but not everyone understands the language. Oja is regarded as a form of communication that is tied to spirituality. It is a form of invocation. Oja intoxicates. It can lure a man whose praises are being rendered to do things ordinarily he may not be able to do. I have seen a man climb a coconut tree during the performance of Oja. When Oja intones the praises of a masquerade, one can see the masquerade act like it is being controlled by a strong force. People are often stirred to give money to a good praise performer, especially the one that uses Oja. It shows how people value praises. Oral praise performance generally requires special skills. Some people claim that it is hereditary, that is, it is a talent that runs in a lineage. Some people deliberately learn the skill. Praise poems, especially the ones performed with Oja, are of great significance to Igbo culture. The poems invoke great impact on the person or persons whose praises are being intoned.
Endiyithandayo mna yimibongo ebhalwe ngutata uSamuel Edward Mqhayi owaziwa ngokuba ngu-S.E.K. Mqhayi. Utata u-S.E.K. Mqhayi wayeyimbongi ephume izandla ekwanguye nombhali. Imibongo yakhe ndiyithandela izinto ezininzi. Okokuqala, lulwimi olusetyenzisiweyo kwimibongo yakhe lusulungekile. Imibongo yakhe igxile kwinkcubeko yakwaXhosa kunye nembali. So imisebenzi yakhe iyaqhagamshelana namasiko kunye nezithethe. Imibongo yakhe inika iwonga abantu abangosaziwayo, isichaza nangeendibano ezazikhona ngalaa maxesha wakudala, ngoko ke inendima enkulu ekugcineni inkcubeko yakwaXhosa. Udandalazisa kakuhle ke kwimibongo yakhe izinto zentlalo, iindibano zezopolitiko, amava wabantu, amazwi wakhe yonana asisipili somzabalazo, ayisisipili seengxubakaxaka ezazikhona ngexesha lamandulo, kunye nokuba sakwazi uba isizwe sakwaXhosa sasinjani ngelaa xesha. Amazwi wakhe ayavuselela kakhulu, ayavuselela. Xa ufunda imibongo ka-S.E.K. Mqhayi, uba umbongo ungothando, uyaziva na uba usemathandweni, ukuba umbongo wakhe ungumzabalazo uba nalaa mfanekiso-ngqondweni wokuba kwakusenzeka ntoni ngelaa xesha. Uba umbongo wakhe ungemo yentlalo uye uzive ingathi kuloo nto abantu athetha ngayo kulo mbongo wakhe. U-S.K. Mqhayi ke ndingathi yeyona mbongi yakwaXhosa kuthiwa ke nguSiya wakwaXhosa, yeyona mbongi ibalaseleyo kwaXhosa. Yiyo loo nto imibongo yakhe ndiyithanda kakhulu. Ngumbhali wakudala kakhulu othetha izinto oye uzibone ukuba ngoku wayezibhale kudala kodwa zisisiprofetho sezinto ezenzekayo nakula maxesha siphila kuyo. U-S.K. Mqhayi ndithanda imibongo yakhe kuba yimbongi yesizwe, uyakhuthaza kwaye inkcubeko yethu igcinwe kuleya mibongo yakhe. Enkosi.
Ṣé kíkí ni kí yín àbí kíkí ni kí yín? Àmọ́ ṣá kí n tó bẹ̀rẹ̀ sí ní fún kàkà kí èèyàn, ẹ jẹ́ n kọ́kọ́ kọba kiri sórí ọba dání má gbàgbé ẹnìkan. Ọba òní ọba àná ọba àjọ gbogbo, ọba tá a lè fún kàkà kí ẹ̀ látàárọ̀ dálẹ́, ọba tá a lè ké pè nígbà wàhálà tí ó dá wa lóhùn. Ọba òní, ọba àná, ọba ìgbà gbogbo. Yes, African poetry encompasses a rich and diverse array of genres and subgenres, reflecting the continent's linguistic, cultural, and historical diversity. Some common genres and subgenres include things like oral poetry, praise poetry, protest poetry, but I would fall in line with oral poetry, which the Yoruba people call Ewi, and it is rooted in traditional Yoruba culture. Oral poetry is passed down through generations by word of mouth, often accompanied by music and dance or even storytelling. Like you all know that in the family of creativity, you have song and you have stories. They're both brothers. So the oral performance of Yoruba people is something that I love. And in these days, I even try to translate them into English, and they're very fascinating. There are so many of the Ewi exponents that we know. There's Lanre Adepoju, there's Olatubosun, whose son, Kola Bosun, is doing a wonderful work translating his father's works. So for me, the question of which is my favorite would be that, because of the tonality, of the way in which the words are used, and in the way in which sense is also made. So it's basically from the Yoruba people, and its uniqueness is not difficult to find out. Just like you have spoken word where you have end rhymes, you have things like in this nation, the confusion that we have is found in the population, and so on and so forth. And it just goes on. And apart from the sound of the words, it also takes you to understand, the sense that is in it. So that, for me, is the Yoruba oral poetry. And we keep on saying, Mumaki, Mumaki, ṣùgbọ́n wọn ò ní kì í ní kúkú.
Ewì Áfíríkà tí mo fẹ́ràn jù ni Oríkì. Oríkì jẹ́ ọ̀kan lára ewì Yorùbá. Yorùbá ní oríṣiríṣi ewì bíi ìjálá, ẹ̀sà, ẹkún ìyàwó àti bẹ́ẹ̀ bẹ́ẹ̀ lọ. Àmọ́ Oríkì jẹ́ ewì aláìlẹ́gbẹ́ nínú gbogbo ewì Yorùbá. Òun nìkan ni ewì tí ó máa ń ṣe àpèjúwe èèyàn kọ̀ọ̀kan láwùjọ Yorùbá. Ó máa ń sọ ìtàn àwọn bàbá ńlá àti ìyá ńlá wọn. Ó sì tún máa ń sọ nípa ìran, ìlú àti ìdílé tí ọmọ Yorùbá kọ̀ọ̀kan ti wá. Oríkì máa ń ṣàfihàn orúkọ, òrìṣà, ìrísí, ìhùwàsí, iṣẹ́ ìṣe, oúnjẹ, èèwọ̀, ọ̀rẹ́ àti ọ̀tá ẹnìkọ̀ọ̀kan, ẹbí tàbí ìlú. Yorùbá máa ń lo oríkì láti kíni ní òwúrọ̀ tàbí bí ènìyàn bá ti àjò dé. Wọ́n tún máa ń lò ó láti pẹ̀tù sí ẹni tí inú ń bí nínú. Wọ́n máa máa ń lo oríkì láti mú kí orí ènìyàn wú kí wọ́n lè rí ohun tí wọ́n bá fẹ́ gbàgbà lọ́wọ́ olúwa rẹ̀. Pàápàá wọ́n máa ń lò ó fún àwọn alágbára bíi ọba, jagunjagun, ọkọ ẹni, ọ̀gá àti bẹ́ẹ̀ bẹ́ẹ̀ lọ. Ẹ jẹ́ kí a wo àpẹẹrẹ oríkì yìí. Àdùnní lèmi jẹ́, àbó olùfẹ́ lèmi àkejì ọmọ, àbó ojú mi ẹ̀ṣọ́ ojú rábẹ̀ ó lé gẹ́gẹ́, àbó ọmọ olódò kan tẹ́rẹ́rẹ́rẹ́, àbó ọmọ olódò kan tẹ́rẹ́rẹ́rẹ́, odò tó ṣàn wéréké tó lọ ṣàn wéréké, pẹ̀lẹ́ ojúmọ́ ní ò gbọ́dọ̀ ọmọ ìran bàjẹ́ àwọn ò gbọ́dọ̀ bú sọ́sẹ̀, sọ̀bọ̀rọ̀ bò lànà jẹ́ ní ọ̀pọ̀dọ̀ náà ọ̀gbẹ́, sọ̀bọ̀rọ̀ mi wù mí jẹ́ kíbi dandan ó mú bá lábẹ́ lọ. Ohun mẹ́sàn-án ló wù yín lé àwọn bàbá tèmi, ìkúnlẹ̀ rúmúrúmú ó wù yín lé àwọn bàbá tèmi, káfárí apá kan dápá kan sí ó wù yín lé àwọn bàbá tèmi, èèpà òòṣà ó wù yín lé àwọn bàbá tèmi, ìyọ́rúgúdú lọ́jọ́ ọ̀sẹ̀ á ní kíní ọ̀hún wù yín lé àwọn bàbá tèmi, òbí ipá wù yín lé àwọn bàbá tèmi, òbí ìfín wù yín lé àwọn bàbá tèmi, àgógó ẹnu mùrèmùrè, orí tí ń jẹ́ku, orí tí ń jẹja, orí tí ń jòkòkò abomi ọbẹ̀ lóore, wọ́n wù yín láwọn bàbá tèmi, àṣẹ mẹ́rìndínlógún lólùfẹ́ kan, ẹ̀sán nú èjì òde, ààrẹ kú ní mí ọmọ Oòduà.
I am not too fascinated by poetry in general. However, taking my mind down memory lane, I remember reading lots of poetry works of European and African origin in my high school days. And the one subgenre of African poetry that strongly captured my attention then was protest poetry. Protest poetry as a subgenre of African poetry is one that addresses political and social problems like colonialism and apartheid in Africa. This protest poetry finds expression in Oswald Mbuyiseni Mtshali's poem, Nightfall in Soweto. The poem focused on the lives of oppressed people, their sufferings, and the resistance of these oppressed people in the town of Soweto during the apartheid in South Africa. Now, coming to what makes the protest poetry of Mtshali, as articulated in his poem Nightfall in Soweto, very unique, we can from a thorough analysis find a number of reasons. One is that the poem provides a very clear picture of what life was all about in that community through the strong use of vivid imagery that figuratively describes the harsh realities of suffering and violence. Again, unlike many armchair poets, the poem is written from a first-hand perspective. Oswald Mbuyiseni Mtshali witnessed the pain and the horrors inflicted on the people, and this makes the voice very genuine. And apart from this, it reflects and represents the voice of a group. It speaks for a marginalized or subjugated group. Readership for any literary work is very important, so the poem employs a very simple language that makes it easy for readers to understand. The simple language makes room for a wide readership. The poem gives readers the opportunity to see the experiences of South Africans during the apartheid period. It provides a historical background to the life of the people of South Africa. Thus, it has a historical significance because it gives the necessary information and the guidance to future generations. The poem is a call for people to act, so it is a tool that drives social and progressive change in a community. And lastly, the poem Nightfall in Soweto, as one that falls within the category of protest poetry, is unique because of the degree of empowerment it bestows on the people who are marginalized by providing them with a platform to resist and express their views. Thank you.
My favorite subgenre of poetry is performance poetry, which is also known as contemporary oral poetry, live poetry, spoken word, or slam poetry. I love it particularly because it lies at the intersection between modern poetry, oral poetry, and performance. Therefore, In a way, it exhibits features of these traditions. As such, this subgenre of poetry has a unique visual and oral appeal which builds into a sensuous aesthetic experience. Performance poetry also elicits immediate feedback, especially when performed live, thereby enabling the poet to evaluate the efficacy or even quality of his poetry. Also, in this subgenre of poetry, we see the past and the present, and we also see a blend of traditional genres of literature coalescing into a singular art form. In Africa, performance poetry has three main origins: the oral performative traditions of the past, modern African poetry, and the spoken word arts of Black American poetry, part of which evolved into rap music. What strikes me the most about this subgenre of poetry is its accessible language and accompanying performance that is designed to meet its audience. Digital technology too has been harnessed to produce, develop, disseminate, and retrieve this brand of poetry for a wider, even virtual audience, resulting in an unprecedented attraction towards poetry in that form.
Andzeni ka swihintani leswi ni swi tivaka, leswi ni tsakisaka ngopfungopfu i maphatekateka. A maphatekateka i ntlangu lowu dyiwaka hi vafana ni tintombi lava va tlangaka swin'we, ngopfungopfu lava va kuleke xikan'we. A munhu eka khambela yena la kucha a veka xivutiso xo karhata ngopfu ka vanakulori va yena leswaku va mu hlamula. A xivutiso lexi xi karhata ngopfungopfu hikuva a xi vekiwi hi mavulavulelo manene, xi vekiwa hi vutlhari ni mfihlakalo. Hi maendlelo lawo, ku xi hlamula ni ku kuma a nhlamuselo wa xona swi kombela a vutivi bya vumunhu ni vutlhari ni vutivi bya swihintana ni swilo swinyingi swa misava. A maphatekateka i ntlangu wa ririmi lani a minchumu ya misava ni mahanyele ya vumunhu swi patsiwa ka ndhawu ya yin'we. Nakulu mabulu, a maphatekateka i mitlangu ya swivutiso ni minhlamulo. Mapatsa mavulavula yo tala kusukela ka swipfumbato ni mintlhamu u hundza eka swivutiso swo patsa ni vukanganyisa ni vutlhari u ta tlhasa ka swintlhanyahloko swin'wanyani swo inge a swi na nhlamulo. Nakulu ntlangu wa ririmi, a maphatekateka ma ni ririmi lo hanya, lo bindza, dza ku fananisa. A muvutisi a komba ku ve ni vutivi, a lava van'wanyani va kuma a vutivi hi ku zama ku hlamula xivutiso. A muvutisi a komba ndlela ya nhlamulo hi maendlelo yo fihlala ni vutlhari byo patsa ni vukanganyisa. Hi ndlela leyi, loko a vatlangi va nga na vutivi byo fana, swi nga endla leswaku va nga tlhasi ka nhlamulo. Hi ndlela ya ku mi komba, ni ta hlaya maphatekateka manganinyana ni mi nyika ni nhlamulo wa kona. Phatekateka i ncini xa ku hala na gwira gala na gwira. Ina vayi hi ku yi tsema hala ni hala. Phatekateka i ncini xa ku loko xi nghena vana a xi yimbeleli. I xi khoma moya loko xi nghena ndzilo. Phatekateka i ncini xa ku loko xi nghena nkila a xi fambi. I ximari. Phatekateka i ncini xa ku loko ri xile a xi voni, kambe loko li pelile xa vona. I n'hweti.
My favorite subgenre of African poetry is Yoruba traditional poetry. It is unique because it is imbued with features such as making a declaration and providing the rationale for it, and presenting a formulaic assertions that border on incantations. We take the first example. In Tubosun or Ladapo's In the Garden of Joy originally written in Yoruba but translated by Kole Tubosun, the declaration from rational structure is evident. We read, "We are in the vineyard of bliss. Hold me here so I can't leave. Close the vineyard gate so they can marvel from far away. Beat the drum of love for me. Let me dance until light. With a blanket of love cover me. Don't let me suffer the freezing night." We take our second example from Black and Beautiful, also written in Yoruba by Taiwo Olunlade, but translated by Tola Osunuga. Take antelope from the animal realm, and animals are robbed of beauty. Take black nightshade from the vegetable realm, and vegetables are sapped of beauty. The incantative pattern is evident in the above poem. Here, taking the antelope from the other animals is directly consequential on them being robbed of beauty. The same applies to the taking of black shade from the vegetables, which directly impacts on them in being deprived of their beauty. This is a structure particularly found in Yoruba traditional poetry. Some scholars have termed this poetry as belonging to the main Ifa poetry or chants genre.
Good day, everyone. Today, I'm excited to share with you my favorite genre of African poetry, which is praise poetry. Praise poetry, or Izibongo, as it is known here in South Africa by the Zulus, is my favorite genre of African poetry, originating primarily from the southern and eastern parts of Africa, including the Zulus, Xhosa, and Sesotho-speaking communities here in South Africa. Praise poetry is a powerful tradition deeply rooted in the cultural fabric of these societies. What sets praise poetry apart is its unique function and form. Unlike other genres of poetry, which might focus on personal emotions or abstract themes, praise poetry is a public art form. It is performed to celebrate and honor individuals, ancestors, deities, and even nature. Praise poets, known as Imbongi among the Zulus here in South Africa, hold a respected status in their various communities, often serving as both historians and custodians of cultural memory. One of the unique features of praise poetry is its use of indigenous language. It is characterized by its rich imagery, rhythmic repetition, and creative metaphors. The language is often heightened and symbolic, with a powerful tone that commands attention and evokes deep emotions. For instance, a praise poet might describe a warrior as a lion who roars in the battlefield, whose spear is lightning that strikes fear into enemies. Such vivid imagery not only glorifies the individual, but also connects the audience to a shared cultural heritage. Another unique aspect of praise poetry is its performative nature. It is not just recited, but performed with great passion and intensity. The performer uses gestures, vocal variations, and even dance to enhance the delivery. This dynamic performance creates an immersive experience, drawing the audience into the narrative and making the celebration of the subject a communal event. In summary, praise poetry is not just a genre, it is a living tradition that embodies the spirit, history, and identity of African communities. This unique blend of linguistic richness, performative energy, and cultural significance makes it a compelling and enduring art form.
My favorite genre of African poetry is the oral poetry genre. I am particularly passionate about the royal poetry of the Nsukka and Nyocha community of Igbo-speaking Delta. This royal poetry is traditionally called Egwu Mobi Nsukka. The poetry could be seen as a subgenre of the Igbo oral poetry. As a subgenre of African oral literature, it does not originally exist in written form. It is a living, dynamic account of the life and history of the Nsukka royal family members in a verbal form. This poetry could be sung or chanted in actual performance. It is performed annually and solely by the royal family members in the presence of a whole community, and it is usually performed during a traditional festival called Oje Festival. As I earlier said, the poetry comes from Nsukka and Nyocha community of Igbo-speaking Delta states. The unique thing about Egwu Mobi is that it is performed with a sense of pride and dignity, being the exclusive property of the royal family members who delight in recounting their great deeds as great and number one family members in their community. Their history is captured in the poetry. The performance is accompanied by some local musical instruments to enhance the melody and aesthetics of the royal heritage in performance. The Nsukka royal family members try to come out in their best during each performance of this royal poetry. The poetry is not only rich in literary aesthetics, but also in cultural knowledge. It is really impactful. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My favorite genre of African poetry will be oral narratives encompassing folk tales, oral history, mythical stories, riddles, and so on and so forth. And all of these have enriched my work as an African scholar over the years. In this case, I'll be looking at Anuoluwapọ, which simply translates as riddles or stories. Now, I understand that the Yorubas have Anuoluwapọ and Anuoluwapọ, but I'll say that I am more fascinated by Anuoluwapọ, which of course is a very popular cultural tradition amongst the Yoruba people of southwest Nigeria. Now, it often begins with a call out by the Akpalo and a response from the Ajalo. Now, Akpalo is Enitong Palo, the one who seeks response to the riddle, and Ajalo is Awantimong Palo, the one who breaks the riddle. Now, Anuoluwapọ often engages one's reasoning faculty and exposes one's level of intelligence. Examples of Anuoluwapọ include 1. Alo, alo. Àkùkọ bàbá mi kan láíláí, àkùkọ bàbá mi kan láíláí. Owó ní jẹ́ kìí jàgbàdo, kí ni o? Translation: My father's cock never eats anything except money. What is it? The answer is ilé ẹjọ́, the court. Ọ̀pá tínrín kanlẹ̀ ó kọ̀run, kí ni o? The long tiny stick that touches the ground and the sky is what? The answer is òjò, rain. Kí ló kọjá lójúde ọba tí kò kọ́ba? What passes outside the king's palace but never acknowledges the king? The answer is àgbàrá òjò, the flood. Wọ́n ní kẹ́nìkan dá ṣe, kò rí ṣe. Wọ́n ní kí gbogbo wa jọ sowọ́pọ̀ ká jọ ṣe, a rí ṣe ní kíákíá. Kí ni o? One of us was asked to do a job but couldn't get it done. They asked all of us to come together to do it, and we got it done promptly. What is it? The answer is ìgbálẹ̀, a broom. Now, this riddle is basically talking about teamwork, team spirits, coming together to get things done, and so on and so forth. Now, this genre of African poetry is unique. I mean, very, very unique in the sense that it engages the call and response pattern and exposes one to in-depth knowledge of Yoruba culture. Now, Anuoluwapọ shows the beauty of the Yoruba language, revealing aspects of the complexities of the Yoruba knowledge system. Anuoluwapọ are fictional stories, no doubt, and so they will entertain naturally. But they are not just for entertainment. They remain functional in the teaching of African history, sociological worldviews and philosophies, ideological cultures, and also traditions. Now, I would say also that another interesting thing about this genre is that it captures the thematic preoccupation of African culture, the rhythm of time and of the people. They are used to teach moral values and principles, work ethics. They're also used to teach how to develop business acumen, how to outwit adversaries, and they remain one of the richest aspects of the Yoruba cultural heritage.
I want to highlight today a genre that I already wrote my PhD about. That's the Swahili genre of the utendi. The utendi is a genre that refers to a long narrative poem, and it's often translated as epic because, firstly, it depicts the story of a hero. It's a narrative, but on the other hand, it has a verse pattern. It became very important as a genre in the 18th and 19th century when Sufi brotherhoods actually tried to spread Islam beyond an Arabic-speaking elite, and they found that poetry and particularly the captivating stories of the tendi were the most adequate means and the most kind of efficient means. And really, the adaptation into Swahili verse pattern became very, very popular all along the coast. So from northern Kenya all the way along what is now the Tanzanian coast, even to northern Mozambique. Tendi were written down, so manuscripts were dispersed at the time, but they were always meant to be recited. And I really loved the recitation mode, but I also loved the tension-driven narratives, the bigger-than-life persona, for instance, of the hero, who is always then kind of wins. It's very episodic tendi, so the hero has to fight several battles. And of course, then there is a final large-scale battle that he very miraculously, often with God's help and the angels' help, then wins. It uses a boastful and often very archaic language that is not easy to understand nowadays, and I find it extremely beautiful. Yeah, nowadays, tendi are not recited so much anymore in Kenya or Tanzania. Well, you can find them on CDs, DVDs, as well as sometimes still cassettes. So I was quite surprised when I came to Mozambique around 2015, not expecting to find Swahili tendi at all. They seemed to follow me. And together with my colleague Shapani Mutiwa from the University of Eduardo Mondlane in Maputo, we found actually in northern Mozambique that people were reciting quite a number of tendi, and we found very impressive men in particular who had memorized around 1,500 stanzas. The utendi has been adapted many, many times in different parts in Kenya, Tanzania, and Mozambique to tell the story of different battles. So we also have stories of the battle for independence, of World War II, of anti-colonial battles against the Germans as well in Tanzania. This is the other thing which I find very striking about the utendi, their adaptability. So stories moved across the Indian Ocean to the Swahili coast. The Muslim stories became adapted, so to say, to a local context and then narrating very local battles, but at the same time, World War I also taking again very global and contemporary dimensions at the time.
I like the narrative genre of African poetry. This is because it is histopoetic. That is, it uses historical materials to form poetic lines. Again, it is unique in dealing with African subject matter in poetic form, drawing from African experiences. This is because it imbues the culture of the people of its origin into its poetic subject matter. The form and creative composition of this genre of poetry is primarily oral, and it is dependent on the language of the community that generates it, as well as on communal experiences, environment, and folkloric culture. This influences its storytelling nature, which encompasses entertainment, education, information, which endeared it to children as a play and creative source. Hence, it uses its own rhyme, repetition, and other elements of poetry differently to capture essence and communicate from African point of view. African narrative genre of poetry has tripod creative features. These include poetry, song, and performance, which are often endemic in its content depending on its communal creative sources. In recent time, this genre of poetry is waning frightfully due to lack of replication, even in writing due to apathy on the side of the learner. Thank you.
Court poetry, a traditional form of praise and performance, has been an integral part of Nigerian culture for centuries. It is found in cultures within Nigeria, among the Yoruba people, the Benin people, as well as the Jukun and the Hausas. Now, court poetry in Nigeria, it dates back to the pre-colonial era, with specific families or clans specializing in this art form. For example, like in traditional Benin society, professional court poets are known as Ugoron, meaning men of heaven's gate. Similarly, in the Oyo community, they are called Akibe, Oba, or King Herod, while in Borno village, among the houses, they are referred to as Maroka or town criers. Among the Jukuns, they are known as Apawaku, that is, the one who worships the king. Now, court poetry performance typically begin in the morning with greetings for the kings, followed by announcements of visitors and the king's arrival, and many others. And this act is carried out specifically by the Apawaku. Now, the professional court poet Apawaku, such as the Apawaku, like I noted, are trained to recall in oral verses the great achievement of the kings and his ancestors. The performance of court poetry is an artistic and creative process that brings the poetry to life. It is an activity based on the praise of the monarch, and each performance is unique in its own way. The roles assumed by the performer and the audience are crucial in the overall meaning and impact of the poetry. For example, like in the Jukun culture, the royal wives assume different roles, including the poet himself. In the case where it is a public gathering or a public cultural activities, drummers, singers, and dancers all at once form part of this performance. More so, while doing so, the court poet goes on into the history of the genealogy of the king, that is the Aku, making reference to great achievement of the fathers before the king, and wisdom that the king possessed to discern wisely in every matter that is brought before his court. Now, court poetry in Nigeria, and particularly among the Jukun culture, is a rich and a complex tradition that has been an integral part of the Jukun cultural heritage for centuries. The historical context, performance practice, and the semiotic implication of this court poetry all contribute to its significance. Now, the role assumed by the performance and the audience and the unique nature of each performance all work together to create a powerful form of expression that continues to play a vital role in the Jukun society.
I'm not really an avid poetry enthusiast, but what I've always appreciated is the freedom that some authors have to depict the reality of their circumstances. Specifically, in the context of African poetry, I've read and still reading several poems by Stella Nyanzi, a human rights and queer rights activist, as well as a feminist. Stella Nyanzi's poetry emerged from the socio-political landscape of Uganda, a country with a complex history of political struggles and human rights activism. What sets her poetry apart is its raw simplicity and fearless confrontation of oppressive regimes. Her writings provide a powerful voice to the marginalized people, highlighting issues such as gender equality, human rights, and freedom of expression. Nyanzi's work is unique because it combines personal experiences with political commentary, creating a poignant narrative that resonates on both an individual and collective level. In her collection, The Roses from a Mouth, She writes in a very straightforward and free manner about her life in prison and also about her battles against a regime that suppressed her idea of equality and individual freedom. One of my favorite poems by her is titled My Take on My Writing, which describes and perfectly synthesizes why I love her way to describe the reality of the daily life in Uganda. And it says, my writing may be cheap, but it is rather effective. My poetry may be tasteless, but it is shaking the nation. My Facebook posts may be tacky, but they grab the balls of the tyranny. My paragraphs may be repulsive, but they sting the queen bee. My stanzas may be irreverent, but they poke at the leopard anus. My language may be dirty, but it exposes the dictatorship. My pen never stops writing. I will write myself to freedom.
My favorite genre or subgenre of African poetry comes from northern Nigeria, known as the Kirari poetry. It's an important part of the Xhosa oral tradition. It's a praise song of Xhosa culture and is used to celebrate the achievement and qualities of individuals. It is often in a formal setting and composed by professional singers and poets. They use language to praise their subjects, and I like it because of the use of imagery and other stylistic devices which they use to create mental images. I also like the rhythmic patterns in their composition. Sequel to the Xhosa Kirari, I also like the Oríkì from the Yoruba culture. The Oríkì is integral in Yoruba culture. I like the fact that it's being recited in various contexts and embodies the essence of Yoruba cultural expression and heritage. I also, an Oríkì celebrates individuals too, gods, animals, places, and the poems convey qualities and histories, shaping values and identity within the Yoruba community. Why I said I like the Oríkì too is because in modern times, women too use this Oríkì to praise their husbands, praise their children in their achievement. So the unique quality of the praise singing and the imageries, the deep reflection, that's why I like Oríkì too.
My favorite genre of African poetry is Oríkì, which is a form of panegyric or praise poetry in Yoruba culture. It plays a significant role in Yoruba oral literature. Its uniqueness stems from its serving as a medium to praise and commemorate individuals, families, deities, objects, and even towns. It can be used to recount the achievements, virtues, lineage, and other notable characteristics of the subjects. The poetry often includes invocations, recounting of genealogies, personal qualities, heroic deeds, and aspirations. Almost every town, family, and clan in the Yoruba nation of West Africa has its Oríkì. But then, not everyone knows or cares about their Oríkì. That is primarily because many are disconnected from their traditional roots, or perhaps find their Oríkì antithetical to their other religious beliefs. Thus, they don't bother to orally pass it on to the next generation. Fun fact: my surname Amao is an Oríkì name. The name means one we know to be firm or established. That's the short form. In summary, Amao is reflected in the power of an Igbo. This, like every other Oríkì name, has its long-form poetry. Examples of other Oríkì names include Abebi, Aduke, Akanda, Ajasa, Ashamu, Ajabi,
Well, as a musicologist and an ethnomusicologist in particular, I would say my favorite genre of African poetry is the epic poetry, which is a subgenre of oral poetry. Epic poetry is often performed with music and dance, recounting the histories and legends of heroes and significant events of indigenous people. Epic poetry in Yoruba culture, for instance, is a vibrant and significant form of storytelling that combines oral performance with deep cultural, historical, and spiritual elements. I stem from the Yoruba tribe of Nigeria, and I'm so proud about that. I can remember vividly in the early 1990s, I was privileged to witness the performance of theater of Shango, the Yoruba god of thunder and lightning. The epic poetry in praise of the deity on that day was excellently displayed. It told the audience of the story of Shango's life, his rise to power, his battles, and his eventual deification as a young girl who grew up in the city without any exposure to any form of Yoruba traditional ritual or cultural precedence. That very day, I had a detailed understanding of the personality of the Shango deity. Well, in terms of uniqueness, epic poetry employs the narrative forms of performance that encapsulate elaborate descriptions, dialogues, and direct speeches. In fact, the language used is usually unique to the deity or living personality it is made for. They are usually rich and metaphorical. They utilize intonation, rhythms, and gestures to enhance the performance. And most importantly, many Yoruba epic intertwine historical events with myth and legends, creating a tapestry that blends the real and the mythical. To me, Yoruba epic poetries, to a large extent, preserve and transmit important cultural values, historical events, and genealogies of the people. Thank you.
Das waren alle Beiträge, die uns unsere Mitwirkenden diesen Monat zugesendet haben. Diese erzählen nicht nur von verschiedenen Genres und deren spezifischen Formen der Darbietung, sondern auch von deren Relevanz für die Gesellschaften, in die sie eingebettet sind. Von welchen afrikanischen Genres oder Subgenres haben wir in dieser Folge noch nicht gehört? Mit welchem Genre oder welcher Künstlerin fühlst du dich besonders verbunden und warum? Schreib uns gerne deine Antwort in die Kommentare unter diesem Video. Um keine neue Folge von Afrikanists Assemble zu verpassen, vergiss nicht, den Kanal zu abonnieren. Bis zum nächsten Mal.
What